Hey guys, Zomfox here, and with the Super Bowl having finally concluded, we are officially out of the NFL season and heading into the spring football season, or the United Football League season. The United Football League's first season kicks off March 30th, so less than 2 months away, and while this is a big deal as it is the merged league between the XFL and USFL, the question still remains on what exactly are the goals for this upcoming season. Now, naturally, we'll get through a full season or those, basic ones, stuff like that. But I'm talking about actual goals in terms of the numbers. Attendance, viewership. What are the goals for this league's upcoming season? That's what we're going to talk about by looking at the 3 past spring football seasons and then looking at what should this league realistically do to actually justify getting rid of 8 teams. Now, before we get into that, massive thank you. We have finally hit 500 subscribers on the channel. We've seen a ton of growth over the past month and a half. And so we are finally at 500 subscribers, on the road to 1,000. Remember, I am doing a giveaway at 1,000 subscribers, and I will be adding something to the giveaway in the Q&A video. Speaking of that, a Q&A video will be coming out in a week or two, so if you have any questions for me, leave them down in the comments below about YouTube, about the UFL, about me, about any other YouTube channel. Leave them down below. Without further ado, let's get right into this with the 4 goals this league has to have. So, the 4 things to look at are going to be the opening game viewership, the regular season viewership average, the overall attendance, and the postseason viewership average. Now, the opening game is the biggest one. It has historically been the premier game for spring football. All the, attention, the media attention, all the fan attention from the NFL draws to the opening game, which is the one that usually does the best. Then, of course, the regular season viewership. It's how well can we sustain fans? How often can we hit the 1 million mark? How often do games get under the 500K mark? Things like that. Then, of course, overall attendance is a big deal. We've seen some teams have incredible attendance, DC Defenders, St. Louis Battlehawks, and then we've seen others like the Vegas Vipers. And then we have postseason viewership, which also has the championship game. The postseason, in theory, should have 3 of the 4 most watched games during the course of the season, which sadly has not actually been the case historically in these modern spring football seasons. So, the next thing is what we're going to look at. We're only looking at the true ultra-modern spring football. Ultra-modern being from the USFL's birth or rebirth to now. Essentially, the XFL 2020, despite a lot of people trying to say it's the exact same thing as XFL 2023, it really isn't. It came during a time before COVID. It came during a time of just a completely different landscape in spring football. It was still very new, whereas the USFL 2022 was when it wasn't really new anymore. It was just a new league. So these 3 seasons are overall the benchmarks to look at. Now, the first thing we're going to look at the opening game viewership. Now, one of these sticks out like a sore thumb, and that is the 2022 USFL. The USFL benefited greatly by having a dual broadcast on both Fox and NBC. It's one of the biggest TV events we've seen in a long time, having 2 of the main 3 TV broadcast channels both housing the game at the same time. This helped it have over 3 million viewers. And while its week 2 game or its second game also did really well, having about 2 million viewers, the opening game having over 3 million was crazy. Whereas the second season, where it was just on Fox, it tapered down a lot. It went all the way down to 840,000 viewers. Whereas the XFL's opening game for its third or second rebirth ended up having 1.57 million on ABC. So the XFL one did really well, but the USFL's first one did the best. Now, in all honesty, it's pretty obvious some of the other things that made the USFL one do really great. Not only was it on 2 different networks, but it had the most historically famous spring football team in the New Jersey Generals going against the team that was actually hosting the whole league in the Birmingham Stallions. Whereas the second season had the second most famous spring football team in the Philadelphia Stars, but they were playing the Showboats, which it just wasn't, to an average person, it wasn't the same as Stallions versus Generals. And the XFL benefited greatly from it being another rebirth and people still having very fond memories from 2020. But again, they did kind of drop the ball on the teams in that one, having the Vipers go against the Renegades. So what should the goal of the new league be? It should be 2 million. Benchmark is 2 million for the opening game. The fact is that this is the big matchup. They did not do anything stupid. The opening matchup is going to be the Birmingham Stallions versus the Arlington Renegades. USFL versus XFL champion. This game is going to have a ton of people watching it who aren't even USFL or XFL fans just because it is a championship versus championship team game or champion versus champion game. So this is going to be a big deal in terms of the overall public eye. So a lot of people are going to watch this, and I think 2 million might be a bit low, but it's the bare minimum bar they have to cross. I would not be shocked if this game hits 2.5 just because of how big a deal it is, as even guys who are going to boycott the USFL or the UFL because of either their team getting cut or because they feel like their league lost, they're going to watch this game. This game has a ton of bragging rights on the line for USFL and XFL fans of their each conference. And overall, this is a big one. So 2 million is the bare minimum benchmark, and that's pretty much the lowest bar you can set. If this game has under 2 million, it is a failure in an opening game sense. Now, the next thing to look at is going to be the overall regular season viewership. And now, some of these numbers, there's like some differences. Like some sites say that the XFL had only 602,000 per game, whereas others say 622, and very similar for the USFL 715 versus like 690 I saw. But the overall most consistent ones, and the ones that save me time from having to go literally through each and every game, is going to be the fact that the USFL's 2022 beats out both the other two again, this time having over 715,000 viewers per game. Now, despite the heavy increase in broadcast TV games and the lack of absolute disasters that happened like week 1 2022 where the rain ended up postponing like 2 games, the 2023 edition had only 604,000 viewers per game. And then the XFL 3.0 had 622,000 viewers per game. So overall, pretty disappointing from this past season, and it's not even like you can blame it on the head-to-head competition, because that was only for a couple weeks during the regular season. Overall, both were pretty disappointing. The XFL struggled a lot by having very few games on broadcast TV, and even if you include ESPN, they didn't really have that many on there either. Most of their games were on places like FX or ESPN2, whereas at the USFL, they just suffered from not having, the benefit of it being a new league and the football fatigue that happened from the XFL. Now, the goal for this UFL season should be 800,000. Beat out the 2022 USFL. Why? Most of your games are on big networks. Now, one thing that's going to be interesting is the 3 different time slots where it's actually going to be regional broadcasts, where essentially there's going to be 2 games playing at the same time, and pending where you are in the country is which game you get. It's going to be interesting to see how that affects the ratings. But overall of the games, instead of it being 40 total games or 40 total time slots, it's only going to be 37. And I believe it's like 35 of them are on either broadcast or ESPN. I think there's like 1 game on ESPN2 and 1 on FS1. So most of the games are on top tier networks. So 800,000 is a bare minimum goal the league needs to achieve. Not only in a pure, just blunt way, it is better than the 2022 USFL, but it justifies having these games on these big channels. Because that means that a lot of them did cross over 1 million, or most of them were able to just stick around 800 to 900,000. Naturally, the ESPN2 and FS1 games are going to taper down a bit and lower the ratings by some. But considering the week 1 game should have 2 million viewers, like I predicted it has to have, I think that 800,000 is a bare minimum goal. I know some people might try and say like 1 million. I don't think we're there yet. I think if all of the games were on broadcast TV and only aside from a couple being in ESPN maybe, but I think that 800,000 is a very realistic goal. Have the ABC games get about 1 million, have the Fox games get about 7 to 750, then the ESPN games follow suit. Maybe the Fox games do better and hit like 8 to 900,000. 800,000 is the goal. Now the next thing to look at is the postseason viewership average. The USFL 2022 once again beat out both the other 2 seasons by having 1.16 million viewers per game in the playoffs, and having the championship have 1.52 million. Now, the second one was still better than the XFL in terms of the playoff viewership, having 990,000 viewers per game, whereas the XFL had 853,000 viewers per game. The USFL championship in 2023 only had 1.16 mil versus the XFL's 1.40 mil. Now, the thing with the XFL one is that the XFL playoff games, the division championships, were absolute bombs. They completely failed. I talked about it before when we were talking about the USFL versus XFL head-to-head. The USFL just hammered them in the head-to-head that week, just obliterating the XFL's ratings in a sense that for the XFL postseason games, which were on ESPN, which are as close to broadcast networks as you can get, barely, I don't even think either of them had 700,000. So that was a pretty big hit to their overall average. Whereas the USFL one, they just didn't really do that great. Now, the first season they did a lot better, but the second season not so much. So what exactly should the goal be for this upcoming season? The goal should be 1.25 million per game and a 2 million chip. Look, the championship should be a massive deal. It should be the only other game that could beat out the opening game. You want to have the championship do better than the opening game for obvious reasons. It's supposed to be the biggest event of the season. It's supposed to be the culmination of the season. As long as the championship isn't even coming close to the opening game, it's always going to be some sort of a black eye on the league. And considering the fact that the past 3 seasons of spring football, we have seen the championship do far worse or barely better than, not even barely better, just overall do worse, aside from the USFL, which only benefited from the opening game doing so poorly. Yeah, I think this is a very, very blanket goal. This is essentially saying you get $2 million in the championship game. This gives you a ton of wiggle room in the 2 other conference championship games. In all honesty, $1.5 million isn't even out of the question, but hitting 1.25 means you did better than the 2022 USFL, and your championship getting over $2 million does better than any of the 3 seasons. Now, the last thing to look at is attendance. Now, the USFL did not actually release attendance numbers. There was, some speculation about a lot of the games, whereas the XFL did announce its attendance, and yeah, it was disappointing. As I've talked about many times before, the XFL attendance was disappointing all in all this past season. It was pretty much heavily carried by St. Louis and DC. St. Louis, incredible, over 30,000 fans literally every game. Then DC, incredible. They had one game where they had 11,000, and aside from that, they hit 12K or higher, and that included a couple pretty much just legit sellouts. Then, of course, the championship game ended up having a really good amount itself at over 22,000, which is better than what any other league had or what the USFL had, as Tom Menson's really doesn't even hold that many. So, overall, the attendance, though, was disappointing. A 14.7 average wasn't great, and places like Vegas and Orlando completely bombed the attendance. So, the goal for this upcoming season is pretty simple. 10K per game, minimum. No less than 10K per game, and then an average of over 15,000. Essentially, do better than what the XFL did in average, and have a minimum of 10K per game. Don't have any game that looks like an eyesore. The Vegas games, not only was the field terrible, but overall watching a Vegas game was absolutely atrocious. Same with Orlando, just because of the complete lack of crowds. Naturally, they weren't as bad as the USFL non-hub games or hub games, but it was still pretty terrible. And so that'll end up being the goals for this league. The 2024 UFL season, the goals are very simple. Have over 2 million viewers of the opening game. Have over 800,000 viewers per game across the season. Then the postseason, have over 1.25 million viewers per game with a 2 million championship, and then have over 10,000 fans per game at least. And then have a 15K average. Now, naturally, for the attendance, if there's a game that gets pushed back because of rain or it does rain, naturally the attendance is a bit more, doesn't have to be 10K minimum, barring, weather conditions, as we even see in the NFL with the Panthers-Falcons game this past season, which was just pretty terrible. So yeah, that'll do it. So this has been Zomfox. Apologies if I seem a little off today. I am a bit sick right now. We are expecting from some sources that the rules, the new UFL site and shop should all be coming out this week. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel, have the bell notification turned on. Again, make sure to leave any questions you have down in the comments for me below, as I am doing the Q&A in a week or two. And then, as always, guys, have a great night.